As if he had been poured in tar, he lies on a pillow of turf and seems to weep the black river of himself. The grain of his wrists is like bog oak, the ball of his heel like a basalt egg. His instep has shrunk cold as a swan's foot or a wet swamp root. His hips are the ridge and purse of a mussel, his spine an eel arrested under a glisten of mud. The head lifts, the chin is a visor raised above the vent of his slashed throat that is tanned and toughened. The cured wound opens inwards to a dark elderberry place. Who will say corpse to his vivid cast? Who will say body to his opaque repose? And his rusted hair, a mat unlikely as a fetus's. I first saw his twisted face in a photograph, a head and shoulder out of the peat, bruised like a forcepsed baby. But now he lies perfected in my memory, down to the red horn of his nails, hung in the scales with beauty and atrocity, with the dying gall too strictly compassed on his shield, with the actual weight of each hooded victim slashed and dumped. Whatever.
And go. Welcome to Mysterium Tremendum. This is our first episode. I am Phoenix, joined by.
As a random lady called me when I was 16, let's go, I'll let you call me the Witching Man.
So this is our first episode, and we are going to be doing a episode on bog bodies.
Yeah, specifically Irish and Danish bog bodies.
And English. There's a couple in England. Let's talk a little bit about who we are first. Why don't you go ahead and tell us about yourself?
Well, my background, I was a mortician, so I do have experience transporting and cremating bodies. And I also did crime scene cleanup before I did that, so I've seen a lot of things that most people are either not willing to see or tremble when they do see it. Back to Phoenix.
I am Phoenix. I have 13 years in film and media. I was a journalist for a while. I have a bachelor's in arts and letters, which is pretty much what it is. It's arts and letters, just doing the history and art, and studying poems and history and archaeology, anthropology, all the ologies. And then I also have experience in, well, I mean, I primarily love history, and I'm a graduate student right now in history. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of, I think I'll bring to the table with the studying history and a lot of the scientific portions, which is, this will be fun because we both love the creepy and the spooky.
Oh, yes.
And we have a connection. We met in college.
Oh, yeah. We've known each other for 15 years, something close.
Something like 2010, 2009, 2010.
Oh, yeah. Maybe a little less than 15 then. Yeah.
15, yeah. So, yeah, we've had a long time together.
Mhm.
We'll. Okay, so what is Mysterium Tremendum?
You have to pull it up because
Okay.
I don't remember
Let's go
exactly.
again with that one. Okay.
Yeah, here.
Our name is Mysterium Tremendum, a great or profound mystery, especially the mystery of God or of existence, the overwhelming awe felt by a person contemplating such a mystery. In theological context, the term is associated particularly with the German Protestant theologian Rudolf Otto, 1869 to 1937. I think that our name is a I think that our name really describes us.
Oh, absolutely. It encompasses everything that we're going to be talking about because it's not just going to be like bog bodies. It's going to be multiple things that we're into. Like there's spirits, there are how other cultures deal with the dead, and sometimes how they exhume them and bring them back and kind of see them every year. And we're going to be covering things like time travelers. Like there's a lot of stuff that this is going to encompass, and it's going to be a great show, and it's going to have a centralization around death, but it doesn't have to be steeped in death.
Death and life, right?
Death and life. There you go. That's a better way.
So let's get into the bog bodies.
Oh, before we get into the actual bog bodies, so as a mortician, I got to see a lot of there were bikers that would come and they would essentially create a parade that would drive with the casket when we were taking them to burials. And that's a very modern thing that you get any kind of parade like business with traveling bodies. It was usually reserved for like royalty and stuff like that back in the times of the bog bodies that we're going to be speaking of. And speaking of that, we can first one we can talk about is the Tollin man.
Yeah.
And when he was found, he was actually so precious of a find that he got a police escort anytime he was moved from one place to another.
Really important actually for history, and we'll come back to him.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we'll come back to him in a second, because let's talk about what bog bodies are, period, right? In Denmark, more than 500 bog bodies and skeletal remains dating to the Iron Age have been discovered. Many of them had rich diets and display evidence of lives of leisure leading up to their deaths.
Yeah, a lot of them were sacrificed either because they couldn't cut it as the ruler or because there was a new ruler coming into play.
Yeah, most of them, their hair is naturally dyed or dyed red from the peat, thanks to the anaerobic conditions of the peat and the bogs these bodies laid in for centuries. Many of them have been mistaken for recent murders, even though they are over 2,000 years old.
Mhm.
The bog bodies have been found in the Netherlands, England, and Ireland. Many scientists believe they were ritual killings. Possibly kings were sacrificed, even contenders or threats to the throne. The Iron Age Celtic people believed the king was married to the goddess they worshipped. If anything should go wrong, like disease or famine, the king was held personally responsible. For example, Crogan Man was found in Ireland in 2003. He died a gruesome death, suffering repeated cuts and stabs where he was dismembered. Experts debate whether he was a sacrifice to the gods, a criminal being punished, or perhaps both. His torso, the only part of him recovered, reveals he was exceptionally tall for his time, standing roughly 6'6". That is really, people were small.
Yeah, for that time, yeah, I mean, being an Irishman, it's kind of understandable, but usually you got those from the
Yeah.
Danish and Finnish parts of the world. But yeah, could you imagine a massive man like that coming at you? No.
He must have been scary.
Oh, yeah, it's 2 inches taller than me. So I'm like, oh, yeah, maybe I don't want to mess with you too much, but
I
we'll
mean,
see.
if he was a king, you could imagine like these people who are tiny going like, wow,
Absolutely.
this giant.
I mean, he would have been seen as almost a god on earth.
Mhm. And he was supposed to be
Yeah.
a god, right? Or married to the goddess.
Yeah. Well, I mean, ordained by God to be royalty,
Mhm.
to be the king.
Or ordained by a goddess. Actually,
A goddess, yes.
Yeah.
By goddess or gods.
He was found at the foot of a famous hill that overlooked an ancient lake that no longer exists in Ireland. The hill famously hosted generations of coronations of kings. Many believe a sacrificed king would be removed from the throne in the same place in supplication to a goddess or deity. These deaths were violent, not quick, as many of the bodies display deep cuts and large holes before death. Even though the bodies were incredibly preserved, many of them are found chopped up because they are often discovered while cutting peat. In Europe, peat has been used for centuries to warm homes and fire whiskey distilleries. For a county with little coal, oil, and gas, peat, deep layers of a partially decayed moss, and other plant matter, is also a ready fuel for power plants. Peat power peaked in the 1960s, providing 40% of Ireland's electricity. As recent as 2020, one of the last power plants to use it went offline. So we're gonna. And what are these bogs anyway? Because
So how bogs are created, they intrigued me much more than I thought they actually would. So basically, the bogs are the peat bogs specifically. The peat itself is created. It has to be in a very wet climate because once it dries out, all the carbon basically it's a solid state of carbon, and once the carbon dries out, it evaporates. It just goes into the air. It disappears. It dissipates, and so what it is it's vegetation, specifically the sphagnum moss, which is a very hardy little moss that it's hard to decompose regardless of whether it's in a wet state or not. And so what it is it's a plant matter that basically just sits in the ground. It doesn't decompose. It's almost kind of like if you were to take coal and put it under pressure and heat and it becomes a diamond. Without that part, it just it sits in the ground, and what it becomes is the peat. When what Phoenix was saying, they used it to warm homes, and even nowadays they still use peat. There's an industry for peat. They you can find it. You can go into YouTube, just talk about or just type in peat, and you can see how big of an industry it was, especially in Ireland. And it's one of the main, like the four main types of wetlands, and there's a lot of them in Ireland and Norway, Finland, Denmark. All of those northern countries have a lot of bogs, and that's why you see so many of the bog bodies found around that area. Because I mean, as Phoenix said, they were used as sacrifices, and sometimes they were used as sacrifices, fertility of the ground. Like let's say, like let's go to the Tolan man who was found in Denmark. So he was seen as like they're unsure as to whether he was royalty or not. So the Tolan man, he had ligature marks around his neck as if he were either hanged. They weren't sure what it was, if he was hanged or if he was dragged by a rope or if he was strangled by the rope, which they did eventually figure out that he was hanged by the ligature marks. It's an inverted V on the back of his neck that that was created by the noose. And so in Denmark, it's a little different than in Ireland. They were usually sacrificed and put into the bogs because iron clumps were found in the bogs. So they were sacrificing the bodies and putting them in the bogs to the goddess as a thank you for giving them the iron. Because I mean, it was the beginning of the Iron Age. They were starting to create weapons, armor, tools out of iron, and they were much stronger than what they had before. So, and it's kind of interesting how people were when they were like, okay, we need to think the gods are what we believe in, and the gods are what give us all of this plentiful like bounties. So let's sacrifice our people to them so we can have more of it. And we find it really messed up. Like to us, we're just like, hang on, let's not do that to people.
Yeah, yeah.
But you have to remember, they didn't have the scientific knowledge that we have nowadays. They didn't understand how the world worked, and that the fact that you don't have to sacrifice people to get those out of the earth. You just have to kind of dig for it. You have to mine it. But it's kind of incredible how they thought about that, and they were just like, okay, we're going to sacrifice our own people, and we're going to get more iron, and we're going to be a stronger people. And the Danish were very strong people. So regardless of whether or not there were actual gods, something worked along the lines in their thought process to make them a force to be reckoned with.
I mean, not to get too off topic, but the bogs were super important to all of the Iron Age people, right? They
Hmm.
believed they all of them have some sort of belief that there's like a fairy or
Yeah.
mystical. I
Hmm.
mean, you have the stories of the Lady of the Lake
Yes.
and and there's so much coming out of any body of water and the beliefs around it at the time,
Yeah.
where the she they believe the she lived there.
Hmm.
You have kelpies, and uh there's all sorts of little beings coming out of
Yeah.
these places. The will o' the wisps, which we know is actually matter and material that lights up, and
Yep.
or fireflies. But at
Hmm.
the time that must have been really scary, like just being around a bog.
Yeah, it's so like unexplainable then because they don't know what's going on. So they're like, oh shit, it must be something mystical.
Hmm.
And that's the funny thing about you mentioned like fairies and stuff like that is because so the Irish bogs were on the outskirts of their kingdoms. It was a little bit different for the Danish because theirs were more of a random pick. Because I mean their bogs weren't always on the outside, like the outskirts of their kingdoms. It could have been within, outside. But it was more important, I think, to the Irish to have them on the outskirts of the kingdoms.
And I mean the Danish and the Netherlands in general are so I think are more covered in water than Ireland.
Yeah.
So you get a whole lot of that firmer belief, right?
Mhm.
Where the Irish, they were, I mean, they're both coastal peoples,
Mhm.
but for some reason, I see a lot more where there's a greater around water in the Netherlands, and you see more bodies in the Netherlands than you do in Ireland for some reason.
Yes, and I think that's probably because Ireland is more of a it's not as well, it's not landlocked at all. And at least Denmark has a little bit a side of it that is landlocked. So you get all those bodies of water that they can find. And it's it's incredible to see what our ancestors have done in their own beliefs. I mean, it's a little scary sometimes too. But it's just very intriguing.
And I mean, some of these are, and we talked a little bit. We were gonna start going on the Tolan man. They believe that he may have. They're not sure, like you said, that he was a executed criminal,
Mhm.
or just by the way his body was arranged and his eyes and mouth were closed. There's a little more respect for him.
Yes, yes.
He lay 200 feet away from firm ground, or what would have been firm ground in his day, which means he was in fact thrown into the water. So I kind of like your theory about, the thank you. Here's a body.
Yeah, yeah. Here's your reward for rewarding us.
Yeah.
Thank you. Please don't kill us.
He wore a pointed skin cap of sheepskin and wool fastened under his chin by a hide thong and a smooth hide belt around his waist. Additionally, a noose made of plaited animal hide was drawn tight around his neck and trailed down his back. Other than these, the body was naked, which
Mhm.
they're not sure if he really was naked or if his clothes just completely decomposed.
Well, in my estimation, I think because they talk about the bogs being really well equipped to preserve hair and clothing, so he probably was thrown in there naked. I mean, we can't confirm it, but in the estimation of that knowledge,
These are Celtic people too. They ran into battle naked.
yeah, I mean, they loved being naked. Let me tell you, I'm not going to say that I'm Irish, but like I have Celtic ancestry and I love being naked. So that's handed down, I think,
We
through
know.
genes.
We know. Uh, let's see.
Well, you can just say roughly 2,000 years old.
Yeah, there was short stubble on his chin and upper lip, suggesting he was usually clean shaven, but had not shaved on the day of his death. The Tullen man's last meal consisted of a porridge with barley, flax, wild seed, and some fish. He's famous for the peaceful, sleeping repose look on his face. For me, he's actually the most peaceful looking of everyone. So I think he's the one that gets the most attention.
Yeah, I think they have stated that he's the most well preserved bog body they've ever found,
They
and which shows.
Yeah, and they could see like the rope, which really helps,
Hmm.
and I guess it helps help date him.
Yeah, yeah. It helps date him, and it helps show how and why he was killed. It helps estimate why and how he was killed.
Those are the Krogan man and Tullen man, I think, are were the most important for helping scholars to figure out what's going on, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And to go to the Krogan man, as you stated before, I jumped a little bit ahead
Yeah,
to the
no,
to the Tolan man. Uh, he was massive, and they were also able to determine his status because he had clean fingernails. He had very short cut fingernails. His hair was well taken care of. He was a well trimmed man. So it is very clear that he was almost guaranteed to be a leader, a king. And they do talk about how he may have been sacrificed because there was another king coming and he just was not fit to be a king anymore. Or like Phoenix has said, he messed up and he was no longer fit to be a king. So they were sacrificing him to the goddess so the people could be safe. I mean, one man to save how many? I don't know what the population back then was, but we still talk about that philosophy today.
Mhm,
Like kill one man. I mean, the trolley question.
mhm.
You kill one man to save five. Like, is it worth it? Is it right? Is it wrong? We don't know. Everybody has an opinion on it.
Well, they believed that a king was blessed by whatever gods they worship, the goddess,
Yes.
gods at the time, because these are Iron Age people, and the scholars believe that they were saying like, your wife is pissed off, we're gonna send you to her, and we're gonna get another guy in here.
Yes, yeah. Like a lot of people think that when you talk about a goddess of fertility, that it's only meant for procreation, but I mean, it was for the fertility of the land as well. It was not just for humans. It was like, hey, we want crops, we need to eat, and I mean, it's a hard place to grow things, so you grow what you can.
It makes you wonder how often they were replacing these guys though.
Hmm.
Like, the crop side, got to get him out. And then another one comes in and no, the crops are still dying. Get another guy in here.
Yeah.
It makes you kind of wonder, did they immediately like turn against these kings and they're murdering them because they're finding so many bodies?
I imagine they probably didn't immediately turn against them because I mean, look at the Krognan man. You being so massive, yeah.
Yeah.
Who's gonna be the one to go up to him and be like, "Hey, we're gonna kill you now"? He's like, "Oh yeah, are you?"
Yeah.
Like, you can't tell me he wasn't a massive warrior
Oh, yeah.
because I mean, they all were. Most Danish men. I mean, they were farmers and they were warriors. Regardless of either one, both are strong. Both are hardworking laborers.
Mhm. Well, I mean, Kroganman would have been a Celt because we had the Vikings and the Celts and everything in between. But can you imagine this guy coming at you with a broadsword?
Yeah, no, I'm not interested in that. I mean, claymores were roughly 6 feet,
Hmm.
and he could have easily wielded one and
Yeah.
been like, "Oh, hang on, he's taller than the than that sword."
Do you see my butter knife? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, most people are taller than their swords, but I mean, a claymore is a big weapon, and that guy running at you with that, no, thank you. Especially, he would have been being royalty, and so he was his diet when they found him was very meat heavy. So it shows that he was found around winter or around the end of winter time because when vegetables were scarce. So you imagine this man eating that much protein and being that large and being a warrior king, like he would have been heavily muscled.
What would it have taken? Because these people, they were good at dressing, I'm sure, because they have
Yes.
intricate stuff. But
Mhm.
what would it have taken to dress a guy like him?
Well, I imagine if he was royalty, not too much because he could have gotten pretty much whatever he wanted. I mean, their clothing was fairly simple too. So I mean, they weren't super gaudy with all of their stuff.
Yeah, simple fibers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, very much. But I mean, there's a quote that it's floating around. It's like the British talking about the Vikings, and the Danes were part of that group, part of them at least. And they talked about how well curated their hygiene was and how good they looked and how it may be a joke from them, it may not be a serious thing, but there is somebody from the Brits who said we had to kill them because our women wanted them and we did not want our women to leave us. So it's like, okay, massive, strong, king, beautiful, hygienic. I mean, who doesn't want that?
Dude, that guy takes a bath. My wife wants him. Get
Yeah.
rid of it.
That guy takes a bath once a week instead of once every 3 months. Oh, dang it.
I know, right?
Or hell, some twice a year sometimes for them.
And it's funny because they talk about his stomach contents, but if you go and look at him online, he's almost nothing but like a little bit of his neck and a
Hmm.
little bit of his stomach, and
Yeah.
then his really big arms. And that's how we know how tall he was.
Yeah. Oh yeah, the wingspan of the
Yeah.
arms, yeah.
That kind of dictates how
Mhm.
tall you were. I would hate to think that he was shorter and he just had really long monkey arms.
Yeah, just an ape running around. Well, they said a lot of the sacrifices in that area as well for any bog body actually, not just in that area. There were a lot of disembowelings. Like it was just part of the sacrifice, the tradition of the sacrifice.
I mean, just like a Highlander, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And these aren't the only bodies. Like I said, there was 500 found, which tells me there's thousands that went into the ground.
Yes.
How many have we not found?
I'm sure there are many. I kind of wonder if maybe if there are some that were buried so long ago that they even the peat couldn't keep them preserved and that they did decompose.
Or they buried them in different uh
Mhm.
places so that they weren't completely, because the water, there's when they're buried in the water, and I try to get my mind around this, right? Because they're dumping them in the water.
Mhm.
Many of them are held down by sheepskin. Because when they describe it, oh, they're held down by skin, and I'm like, skin.
Yeah.
It's sheepskin. They're like putting posts in to keep them
Yep.
under the water so they don't come back up, but they don't because it takes a lot of it takes a lot of water to stop a body from coming back up.
Oh yes. Oh yes. And they've talked about, or they talked about, they would find ligature marks around ankles and wrists as if they were tied to the bottom of the bog, or if they were like tied to rocks to stay like underneath the water, because the water being so acidic is what keeps them so well preserved.
You also have some really interesting cases where they're being held down by like because they're are they being held down by blankets or a cape? Some scientists have said, oh, maybe it's a
Mm,
cape that is on top of them, but they're literally being staked to the ground, which means they climbed in there with them,
yes. Yeah.
and they didn't just push them in there like bye bye.
And I kind of wonder, this will be something that I'll have to look up, maybe bring to a future episode. Um, since they in the water wasn't getting too much oxygen, like if they were sunk in armor, because armor underwater usually gets oxidized and then it rusts and then it dissipates.
Yeah.
And I wonder if in peat, like peat bogs, if it would actually do that, if it would be oxidized, because I'm sure there is at least some oxygen in peat bogs.
A bit. It's pretty anaerobic.
Yeah, because I don't think there's a whole lot of life other than vegetation
No,
in bogs.
no. I
Maybe bugs on the surface.
I don't know. That'd be interesting to look at
Yeah,
if there's even fish or anything.
yeah. There we go.
Obviously they weren't eating that
Oh
because
no,
yeah,
no! Why? They're throwing bodies in there.
yeah.
I mean, essentially, you don't eat where you shit.
Well, I meant like the little animals inside the water or anything. They're perfectly preserved. There's
Yes.
no animal predation, which means that they were like shoved in there
Mhm.
and they were pretty good. Although I like your theory because it's Iron Age, right? So
Mhm.
they're slowly starting to create armor.
Yeah.
Maybe very not what we know as armor, like I think video game level armor, right?
Yeah. Well, and iron is one of the softer of the harder metals as well, because I mean they were able to work it with tools that were not iron.
But then you also have these swords coming out of the Iron Age that we
Mhm.
find in places all the time. So it makes you wonder what were they wearing? Were they naked? Go back to the
Yeah, I mean they could have been, and I mean when it came to, well, I guess yeah, that's actually further along. That's outside of the Iron Age, so I'll cut that
yeah.
one out there. I was going to mention the steel, like when they started introducing carbon into the steel to make
Mhm,
their weapons harder,
mhm.
and they didn't even do it on purpose. It was an accident
Whoops,
because
yeah.
they thought they were putting the souls of animals or the dead into their weapons, and then they just made a harder steel, which is also incredible. But it's just like, damn, like how many things have we done in history that are complete accidents?
I mean, that's where the eureka comes from, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It is just like, damn, okay, we'll take it. That's what made them such strong warriors too in battle, was that their weapons were just that much stronger than the people they were fighting.
I had a college professor say long time ago that the most interesting parts of history was when someone said, "That's interesting."
Yeah. But I think we're getting a little off
Yeah,
topic
yeah,
when we're
right.
talking. We're starting to focus too much on like Viking warriors and
I
stuff
know.
like that.
So not all of these guys were just kings, right? Like
No.
we're fighting women too, and just regular people, which makes you think that they were pushing all sorts of bodies into these peat bogs.
Oh yeah, you sacrifice. I mean, I can't step into the mind of that people to understand why they sacrifice who they sacrificed, outside of sacrificing a leader because he's a poor leader, or how because he's become a poor leader. So you have to imagine they had legitimate reasons to sacrifice people that were not leaders, and it was just maybe it was like a maybe they believed that the goddess would take any of their people as long as they were sacrificing to the goddess.
And that was the interesting part. I'm sure I'm gonna butcher this one, but there's a Mini Braden woman. She in the style of the woolen cloak in which she was wrapped dates this woman back to the late 16th century. So they were sacrificing for a really long time.
Oh, yes.
Distinguishing her from the more common Iron Age bog bodies, she was in her late 20s or early 30s when she died. Given that she was interred in a peat bog in what was likely an unconsecrated grave, was she? They're saying that she didn't really have a whole lot of respect to her burial,
Yeah.
and she wasn't even they I guess they looked at her stomach and she just ate kind of normal food.
Mhm.
She wasn't treated with that much respect. She may have been a murder victim or a suicide, but they aren't clear on that.
Yeah.
She definitely didn't have any of the, uh, the running crazy knives through her or stabbing her in the heart or
Mhm.
anything. It's just they can't tell.
I mean, a peat bog would have been a great place to hide a body too, like, through after murder.
Mhm.
I mean, obviously, they didn't have the investigative skills that we have nowadays with our technology and, like, the skills that we've built up through hundreds of years of investigating murders and stuff like that. I mean, put them at the bottom of a peat bog, nobody's gonna go in there because everybody knows, like, "Hey, peat bogs aren't safe at all."
Yeah, right.
So stay out of there.
You can drown in peat bogs.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I mean, if you think about it, that would have added a little bit of more scariness where if you
Mhm.
were walking around in the middle of the night trying to find your way
Yes.
and then you're stumbled into a bog, and how do you get out? You're
Yeah, as soon as like, if I were stumbling around in the night, as long as I wasn't drunk and I was coherent enough to actually, like, think about what I was doing, as soon as I hit water, I'd be like, "Ah, nah." Like, "We're gonna turn around, we're gonna go a different direction because 'cause I'm not sure if that's a bog or not."
yeah. Well, they must have gotten stuck, right? Because it
Yeah.
would have been very soft ground.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure the soft peat was further out too, away from the water, because they kind of created, like, the peat when it just started piling up, it created, like, little domes, like a dome of peat until the sun would hit it and dry it out, if there weren't trees, uh, covering it.
Oh, I mean, have you ever like touched the boggy land though
Oh,
before?
yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Get stuck in that
Y
stuff.
your foot starts to sink, you're like,
Yeah.
"Ah, hang on." Yeah, yeah.
Help.
I don't like this. Can I get an adult?"
I am an adult. Uh,
That's what we all say.
no, the so it would have been very scary if
Mhm.
there was no one to come help you. You're stuck, you're sinking.
Yeah.
The water is rising. The water would have come in with a tide often
Mhm.
and risen up and gone down. And these people aren't very tall. They're
Yeah.
they're gonna drown or starve or
Mhm.
whatever if they're stuck.
And to touch lightly on mythologies, that could have been where several mythologies came from. Like, I mean, Kelpies. Um, I'm, sh- I mean, bog hags,
Will o' the wisp.
will-o-wisp. Yeah, I mean, that's how they explained it. Like, they didn't understand that they were just sinking and drowning. You could have been like, "Oh well, Sister Annette just got taken into the water and just drugged down."
Yeah.
Well, we don't know what happened. This must be a Kelpie, the lady in the water. I don't. It's,
Yeah. My sister never came back last night. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're upset about it, but we're not going in.
The fairies have got her now. It's okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they'll take care of her.
A small percentage of bog bodies are, in fact, children.
Ah, yes.
The Yid girl appears to have been strangled and stabbed at the age of 16. Some experts believe she was selected for sacrifice in part because of her awkward gait and curved spine. CT scans revealed she had scoliosis.
Mhm.
So she wasn't perfect or anything.
Yeah.
She was actually quite the opposite, but they picked her for a sacrifice. Other CT scans of her skull aided the reconstruction of her face. Her long fair hair was preserved in the peat, but on half of her head it had been cut off deliberately before her death.
Mhm.
Other bog bodies have also had their hair cut when they were killed.
And I do believe that she actually, when they found her, they figured out that she lived a fairly modern life. Like, she wasn't royalty, but they weren't able to confirm whether or not she was just like the lowest class or if she was like essentially middle class, because she traveled. She traveled around. She saw the people, and they were able to tell by a certain element in her skin when they found her that she traveled around to different places because there are different levels of it in the water. And when you drink it, I can't quite remember what the element is.
In the teeth, yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, so they were able to determine that she ate well, she had decent clothing, and she traveled. and they were kind of determined that women had quite a bit more freedom in that area as well to make friends on their own, to go out on their own and do things on their own. They weren't just they. I don't want to talk bad about too many people, but there were a lot of cultures back then that were very much just like, no, women are lower. You have to listen to us. And it's just kind of again, it's intriguing to see like different cultures and see how they treated women or how they treated their people. Just their cultural values were different.
And I have a theory about this one too, because we say child. They think that she lived anywhere between 50 AD and 100 BC, but and she was found in Drenthe in the Netherlands in 1897. So many of these guys have faded away and
Hmm.
rotted away. They weren't preserved because the 1800s had no idea
Yeah,
how to save these guys. But I have a theory about her because we say,
salt them and turn them into jerky.
yeah, right. uh, we say that she was probably approximately about 16 years old because
Yeah.
she was starting to become a woman.
Mhm.
But at that age, they were adults already.
Oh
We
yeah,
say
I mean, as
child.
soon as you can procreate, you were an adult in
Yeah.
that time. Like you had to be.
Mhm.
They didn't have as long of lifespans.
So the fact that she was so well off and she was a little bit older, I
Mhm.
have this theory that she may have been uh being punished for and
Yeah.
because she had her hair cut off.
Yeah, I'm wondering why. Because I mean, that culture was very insulting to have your hair cut.
Mhm.
Um, I kind of wonder why it was shaved only, or why only half of it was shaved. Because I mean that, as far as I know, that's not a hairstyle that
Yeah.
was common back then. So it's like she may have been being punished. I kind of wonder why. I wonder if it was by her own people, or maybe she got caught up in some with some bad people, and they're the ones who sacrificed her or killed her or put her in there.
Because we do have other instances of even mummies and such like Uti. They believe he was chased by another group of people that weren't
Mm,
his own people
yeah,
and he was murdered by them.
yeah.
There was a lot of back then there was a lot of turf fighting over turf.
Oh yeah, there were plenty of people who wanted them dead. Like those, like yeah,
Yeah, so it makes you wonder where they saying like whore, you go in the peat now. um
yeah.
yeah,
How dare you be out here alone
yeah,
without a man?
yeah.
Like it could have easily been another culture that came and saw that and were like, I don't think so.
Or
And
she
then
was caught with the wrong person, somebody's husband.
yeah, I mean there are a lot of speculation you can do. There's anything, but I mean yeah, with you bring up a good point when you say like half her head was shaved and she could have been being punished because of that, because that was a punishment. Like you cut the beard off of a man, that's basically like emasculating them and basically saying like you're a child, you are not worthy of being a man yet.
Yeah. No, no, yeah, you're no longer a man at
Yeah,
all, right?
yeah.
We're gonna
And I do believe that that women in that day and age as well, like longer hair meant they were higher status or they were more valued as people, like in general, not just as women, but as people in general. And again, to shorten their hair or to shave part of it off, insulting or punishment.
take away her beauty.
Yeah. And it wasn't always death was not always included in that. Most of the time that would be enough of a punishment, just cutting the hair off, that they would yeah. they would just leave it at that and not kill them. They're like, yeah, everybody knows that you fucked up
Mhm.
and that we're punishing you and you are a child.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
It does. It makes you wonder because some of the others had been shaved.
Mhm.
We mentioned one of them had stubble earlier,
Oh yes.
so it makes you wonder. Did they shave him?
Mhm.
Were they punishing him? They were torturing him before death. It makes you wonder. Was that part of the whole punishment thing? We'll never know.
Yeah, there's just no unfortunately, there's no way for us with the technology we have and the knowledge we have, no way for us to confirm why they were sacrificed the way they were or killed.
Near her also was the Wording Men, 100 PC to 50 AD, which they're around about the same time as her.
Mhm.
They were long found called the Wording couple and thought to be a man and a woman.
Oh, those are the ones that were intertwined with each other in the bog?
Experts now speculate these men may have been brothers, lovers, or father and son
Mm,
because not one of them wasn't even a girl. That's
mhm.
pretty insulting after death. to be found and be like, look, it's a girl. Oh, ouch.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, it's a little bit hard to tell at first. I mean, especially with a bog body, because they don't come out looking necessarily like a person. You can only really tell from the form,
Yeah.
because their skin, like as Phoenix mentioned earlier, their hair is usually dyed red, and their skin is also very darkened from the peat in the bog. So they come out looking not necessarily like the people that were put in there, because I mean, the people that were usually sacrificed into a bog usually had fairly pale skin, or maybe slightly tanned, or a ruddy colored skin. They weren't dark like Greeks and Romans and all of them.
Mhm. Experts now speculate these. Let's see. One of them suffered a large chest wound and his intestines spilled out when he was laid in his grave.
That disembowelment. Yeah.
According to the Roman historian Strabo, some Iron Age Europeans tried to divine the future by reading a victim's entrails.
Ah, yes. Good old divinity. You got the bone dice, you got the entrails, the tea leaves, like all kinds of stuff like that.
That just it makes me wonder: did they kill one of them in front of the other and then shove the other guy in? Because they don't.
Like a witness kind of thing.
Well, they don't really mention what the other one, how the other one died, and they can't always tell with
Yeah.
some of these guys. And they even say like, oh, it could have been the head wound, or it could have been the stab wound, or it could have been, or there's no marks.
Yeah.
Sorry, we can't tell.
Could have drowned. It could have been. I mean, at that point, the organs aren't usually preserved well enough to be able to tell, like, if they drowned or if they were poisoned or whatever it was. You can only really tell if they have a physical sign out, like on the external part of their bodies, like the ligature marks on their wrists or their ankles, or being hanged.
Because the bone would often, they don't realize, but the bone would be broken in the throat if they're being strangled.
Oh yeah.
We could talk a little bit about how the hangings work and how can they tell about the hangings.
Yeah. Well,
But go ahead. Sorry.
if we're gonna go into the hangings,
Yeah.
like being hanged, so you don't normally, if the knot is tied correctly, you don't die from suffocation. You die from your neck being broken, because that knot it's positioned at a specific spot of the back of your neck, that when you're jerked the way you are when you're dropped, your neck snaps. It didn't always work that way, because we are human. We make mistakes even when we're killing other humans. And but that is the way, that is the intention of a noose.
So they can tell that some of these bodies did probably had broken necks,
Yeah.
and whatnot.
Mhm.
But some of these they don't mention how they died. I've looked up how the other one died. I don't see any mention of how, and I could be mistaken.
They're probably either too uncertain to state anything, or it's just they don't know at all.
I can only imagine, like, even just sticking him in the water and drowning him, and then sticking him
Yeah.
with a
And again, you can't tell, because he's been in there for so long. You can't tell that he drowned.
Yeah.
Because I mean, nowadays, yeah, we have the ability to tell when somebody's been drowned, but that's if they're found freshly. They can't be in there for thousands of years. I mean, by that time they're going to be gone anyways, unless they're in a peat bog, unless they have some kind of preservation around them.
I mean, yeah, and then you see children again. You go back to the children again, 13, 14 years old, and I call it. They talk about, oh, it's a child, and these children. It's another one where I think the Winby girl, Germany in 1952. It's unclear exactly how she died, but she was merely 13 or 14 years old. That she was buried in a bog with a woolen band covering her eyes,
Mhm.
which this one is kind of fascinating to me because I don't know how many Viking shows you watch, but you see them like covering the eyes and the
Yeah.
psychic stuff.
Well, yeah, maybe it's like comparing their mythologies and their beliefs to kind of like Greek or Roman. Maybe they were covering her eyes so she couldn't see. When, like, once she made it to the other side, she couldn't find her way to whatever it is they believe that you should find your way to. And again, they also may have been sacrificed so young for their innocence, because that was a big thing with sacrifices back in that day, with a lot of different cultures. They saw, like, oh, little girls, little boys, they have, children in general have innocence that our gods or goddesses may want. Maybe they're the most potent and we're going to sacrifice them.
she's an interesting case too because only 5 yards from her body, the corpse of a man lay buried, and some experts suggest that the two were actually in an adulterous affair, possibly
Mm,
because they're killed and buried at the same time.
mhm,
Like the Yid girl, Winby girl had part of her hair cut off at the time of her death.
mm.
So it's a little
Yeah.
fascinating. Did they cover her eyes to save her from seeing what was about to happen to her? Or
Or
was this some sort of ritual thing? Because some shows have actually depicted Vikings and they cover the eyes of those who are can only be described as psychic.
okay. Kind of like the weird.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. That would make sense if that was their belief. They would be like, yeah, we cover your eyes. Outside of like the spiritual realm or the supernatural realm, you could maybe they covered her eyes so they wouldn't, or so she wouldn't see them killing her adulterous mate.
Oh,
Maybe it was deemed that she was innocent enough to not have to witness that before death, but not innocent enough to not die.
interesting one.
Which again, our modern sensibilities, we see that as being nuts, but you have to think she was considered adult at that time. Even 12, 14, regardless, once you're able to have a baby, you're considered adult enough to suffer adult consequences. And back in that time, they also went through challenges to become adults. Like nowadays, we don't really have as many challenges when it comes to transitioning from being child to adult. It kind of just happens. But back then they had rituals put in place to become adults. A lot of cultures did. So it could have been something like that too. Maybe they did think that she was a psychic or that she could see into the supernatural realm and they were like, "Okay, like here's our test. We're going to slit your throat or we're going to do whatever we're going to do to you. And if you survive, all right, you can become the next oracle or the next witch doctor or whatever it was they thought she would become." And obviously that's not going to happen.
Yeah, right. It's fascinating because everything that we're given and everything we see, we can't really know the circumstances of their deaths
Mhm.
and who they were in a society
Yeah.
because there's nothing written. There's no like, hey,
Oh yeah.
that one's a traitor and that one's a whore and that one's a king and yeah.
Both of those cultures, the Celts and the Norse, they were not known for for any kind of documentation. All of it was storytelling, which I mean, we nowadays we have to dig through and kind of see if we can find truths in it because there was a lot of mythology intertwined in that truth as well. And so it's like, damn, you could have given us some written word, damn it.
It just comes back to them cutting girls' hair off, and
Yeah.
it was disrespectful
Mhm.
to send her like that.
Again, though, I wonder why it was the specific shaved. Only half of it was shaved and not all of it. I wonder if there was like a specific meaning to that.
They say half her head was cut off. It makes me
Uh,
wonder, did they chop that because they didn't exactly have scissors. Scissors didn't exist yet.
no, I mean they could have scalped her or
Yeah.
something like that.
Or and that this occurred to me when I was reading it. Did the cutting peat come at her head?
Oh, like modern technologies, yeah, it could have been.
But the fact that we have several girls whose hair was cut at
Mm,
before they died, and then they died in a irritual or painful way, just makes me think that someone was mad at them,
yeah, yeah. There was some kind of specific meaning behind it. We just can't determine.
or someone honored them, and they were sent. But
Yeah,
you can't know.
I mean, the death wasn't always seen as a bad thing to those cultures. I mean, look at the Vikings. Death, as long as it was in battle, was seen as very honorable.
Holding
Like
your
that's what
sword,
you wanted.
yeah.
Like they scoffed at like dying of old age in my sleep. What the no, I don't want that. I want to die in battle with my sword in my hand, stabbing another fool. Or him stabbing me. One of the two. It's gonna happen that way.
Come at me, right?
Yeah.
In fact, that you were a successful warrior if you didn't die in battle, but you were even more successful warrior if you did die in battle.
Hmm. I mean, eventually, and I mean it's not always the case, but if you got to old age, you were almost looked down upon sometimes. They weren't as well taken care of as some other cultures, just because it was seen as like, well, you did some good things in life, but you're also an old man. You can't. I mean, then their whole thing was strength. Like you can't do a whole lot anymore.
Now we gotta feed you.
Yeah, you're just a mouth we have to feed, and you're not doing anything for us. And they had to be that pragmatic, and they didn't have to be that much of a dick to people, but they had to be pragmatic with the scarcity of what they had.
Gotta send Grandpa off. Give him his sword and bye-bye, Grandpa.
Yeah, honestly, if I was back in that day and I made it to 80, I'd be like, you know what? Just give me an axe. I'm gonna run at these Celts, these Romans, whoever I'm fighting. I'm just gonna charge at them. I don't even care if I make it out. Hopefully, I die. And then you kill all fucking 15 of them, and you're like, God damn it! I just want to die.
So, sing songs about me. Bye.
Yeah. What is it? There's a song that it says the Irish they're kind of funny when they sing songs. They'll sing sorrowfully about love, and then they'll sing like happily about fighting.
Right. My wife's out of my hair. Dum da dum da dum.
Yeah. It's like, oh, I'm in love. Aha! We fight, we fight, we fight.
Then we have the Grubal man. Peat cutters accidentally struck his head with their shovels. Knowing of Tullen Man and other finds in the region, they were less shocked that they might have been otherwise. Grubal Man was carefully excavated under the supervision of archaeologist and bog body specialist P.V. Glob, and has become one of the most x-rayed and analyzed corpses in the world. Before his throat was cut, Grubal Man ate a soup laced with hallucinogenic fungus, perhaps intended to induce a trance-like state in a ritual that included his sacrifice.
That was pretty well documented that the Norse would do that. They would basically give them shrooms and then like hyper alcoholic mead, just so they would be tripping balls before they were sacrificed.
Dude, I'm so high.
Yeah, I mean, you have to wonder, like, were they doing it to be nice, or were they doing it to get some entertainment before they were? I don't know, but I mean, that it was. I'm sure there is a reason that might be documented. I'm not sure.
Like, hush, this is good for you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you think about the berserkers in that culture, like that's what they did. They took shrooms, and then they would drink a lot, and that's basically what made them almost unstoppable in battle. They couldn't feel your puny little sword going into their gut. Eventually, yes, they died of their wounds. They weren't godly, but they would take another 10 of you out before they even went down. I mean, there are tons of stories about Viking berserkers taking on just an insurmountable amount of people and not going down until they've taken a ton of them out. And it's like, damn, you are crazy people. And one of the ways,
and they're naked. Usually.
oh yeah, I mean, run around there. I mean, imagine you're a British guy and you're sitting there, you're looking across the field, you're like, yeah, we're gonna get this. And then you see an army of naked dudes that are at least 4 inches taller than you and massive. You're like, huh, that's pretty terrifying. Like, it was very much a psychological strategy.
Yeah.
But another way, one thing that the Norse did was they would test gut wounds to see whether you would die or not by giving them really strong onion soup. If you could smell the onion soup through the wounds, you were done. There was nothing they could do for you.
I'm a doctor. Hang on, I'm gonna go make him some soup.
Yeah. I mean, medicine's always existed. It's just not always been so advanced.
He was so well preserved, Grobelman, that his fingerprints were able to be taken.
Really?
Information about Grobelman's life has been ascertained from his remains. His hands were smooth and did not show evidence of hard work, indicating that he was not employed in hard labor, such as farming. Study of his teeth and jaws indicated that he had suffered from periods of starvation or a poor state of health during his early childhood. The man's skeleton showed signs of significant calcium deficiency. His spine also suffered from the early stages of spondylosis deformans, a generalized disease of aging. Due to the shrinkage that the corpse suffered in the bog, the man's actual height is not known. It is known that he had dark hair, although this too was altered in the bog, and now appears reddish in color. He was around 30 years old when he died. He and Tully Man are subjects of a poem, which we read at the beginning of the show.
Yes, we did. And that's probably why he wasn't like employed in hard labor, because with such a deficiency in his body, like he wouldn't have been able to do the labor they would have had to do.
That's an interesting part too, because some of these bodies they show that they had hard lives in the beginning,
Mhm.
and then they got better and better. It was almost it'd be also like you grew up poor,
Mhm.
and then got a lot of money because you became a CEO,
Yeah.
but it still shows in your bones that you didn't drink the milk and didn't
Yep.
didn't have a so good life. But then it shows that he's also aging,
Mhm.
which 30 was God, we'd be old. We'd be like, time to die soon.
Yeah, they didn't go too far beyond 30. Like, I mean, it's not quite as bad as like popular belief is, but 30 was not middle age. It wasn't even like quarter age. It was definitely close to at least probably over half of your life.
I mean, you could have been a grandparent by then because
Oh yeah.
you
Oh
were
yeah.
having kids when you were a early teen,
Hmm.
and then they were having babies by that
Yep.
point. So you would have been pretty old. So he would have been a grandpa.
Oh yeah. Yeah, he would have had kids and then they would have had kids. I don't know if he did. I don't know if he was with anybody and had a family outside of his immediate family.
Which makes me think that this guy was probably a king. He was taken care of early on. He may have not been originally meant to be
Hmm.
a king. Like he must have, because they chose kingship a different way than they do now. They didn't.
Yeah.
It wasn't necessarily linear. It was often sometimes he killed someone, or
Yep.
his father killed someone, and he just inherited it from his dad.
Hmm.
But he had a tough childhood and just somehow, or even became someone important later in life. Maybe he was close to the king.
It could have also been that because his body was so weak from the diseases he had, that he didn't have the ability to go out and do labor or anything physical, so he had all the time in the world to read and educate himself, and he may have been a strong strategist.
But he was still sacrificed, which is sort of interesting.
Oh, yeah, maybe he fucked up a strategy real bad. Like, oh yeah, this is worth death. Sorry, bud.
I'm sorry, king.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting topic because you can't really talk about these guys without talking about why they were probably being sacrificed. Again,
Yeah.
going back to the goddess or fairies or whatever,
Mhm.
or possibly it's interesting to speculate
Yeah. They
why.
are a mystery that cannot stand alone. Like, you have to look it out, like external sources,
Mhm.
to see why, how. How is most of the time pretty easy to spot, but why were they being sacrificed? Not so much. That's very much a cultural reason.
It's just it's terribly fascinating to me because if these people were so important and they died in such a terrible way,
Mhm.
it's an I can't get my mind around the cultural, like, we love this guy so much, you're gonna send him to the goddess now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can look at the Japanese. They had seppuku,
Seppuku, yeah.
seppuka. What? Okay,
Seppuku, yeah.
okay. Say it one more time.
Seppuku.
Seppuku. Um, that was seen as more honorable than dying by your enemy, and maybe it could have seen as some honor we just can't quite figure out because it's not. Maybe it wasn't culturally significant enough to be documented or be told about.
They also have really interesting instances of child sacrifice. Not that child sacrifice is ever good, but child sacrifice in the Mayan culture and
Mhm.
in Aztec culture
Oh
and other
yes.
different cultures where they put these kids up on mountains, and they had relatively normal lives before this,
Mm.
and they must have been chosen a couple years before their death, and their whole life changed. Their diet changed, their how
Yes.
they were treated like gods,
Mhm.
and they were placed on this, and again with the drugs,
Yeah.
they're drugging these people, which makes me wonder, are they drugging everyone, or it's so horrific because one of the bodies they dragged ropes through the arms, they believe,
Mhm.
before they were.
And branches as well. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just, I can't even imagine.
Like, what's the purpose of that? Because that's not going to kill somebody.
Yeah, yeah, right. And like I mentioned before, it wasn't quick. It was
No.
it was long, and there was must have must have believed that there was a reason for long suffering.
Well, that could be one reason that you see so many basically live most of their life in squalor, and then all of a sudden their diet changes to something amazing. They're better off. They're better taken care of. They're better hydrated, better diet. They're better groomed, and their life just suddenly becomes better. And it could just be because basically what they're doing is they're building them up as a sacrifice, whether it's known to them or not.
Do you think they knew? What do you think?
I think some of them probably knew, and I definitely think not all of them were or sacrifices. 'Cause I think they actually say that not all of them were sacrifices, but I think some knew, and if they didn't know exactly what was going on, that they were being prepared to be a sacrifice, like the kings and the royalty. I think they knew that it was an option if they messed up. So I mean, there's that fear, but I mean, in those cultures, there wouldn't have been much fear of it. They're like, well, I can be sacrificed, but if that happens, that happens. If it doesn't, then I'm going to be a great king.
Yeah, right. it I can't. I always have a tough time imagining that one. And they must have. Well, you do see some of these people. They had food issues. They were sick,
Hmm.
and then their diet changed. I guess if I was struggling and I was poor, and then they were like, "Okay, so we're gonna feed you steak for the rest of your life until we go kill you in a swamp."
I mean, some people even nowadays they go to prison specifically to get 3 meals a day, a
Mhm.
warm place to be, and a place to sleep. Like they're not out committing severe crimes, but they know that they can get that if they go into prison or jail. And there are people that do it.
Humans are strange, aren't
Yeah.
they?
I mean, our minds are built to survive outside of the constructs we've created for ourselves and society. That's what we're here for. We're here
Yeah.
to survive and procreate. Biologically, that's what it is.
Pretty much. Yeah.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is our first episode of Mysterium Tremendum. Where will you be when our next episode comes out?
Thank you for joining us.